Today we're digging into the teachings of a pretty fascinating spiritual figure from Korea named Chae-young-gong. And his message is, well, it's a bold one. He says the old ways of faith just aren't cutting it anymore. So let's unpack his vision. At the very core of his message is this really challenging question. Chae-young-gong is basically arguing that our whole approach to spirituality is outdated. He's saying that the time for just asking the heavens for help, for that kind of passive prayer, it's over. So where does he start? With what he calls a crisis of faith. According to him, the world is up against this massive spiritual challenge because the old methods, the ones that used to give us comfort and answers, they've just lost their power. The rules of the game have changed. And check out this quote from his lecture. It really hits the nail on the head. He's literally declaring an end to passive belief. The message couldn't be clearer. You're not going to get help just by praying and waiting anymore. It's time for people to actually use the knowledge they've gained and do something. Okay, so this is where he really breaks it down. He makes this super important distinction. On one side, you've got what he calls shinong, this passive kind of faith that he describes as basically just clinging on and begging for help. But on the other side, there's jonggyo, which he says is true religion, an active path of learning universal truths and then going out and sharing them. And his point is, the world has been stuck in that first column for way, way too long. So if the old way is broken, what's the fix? Well, this is where Chae-young-gong introduces a brand new guiding principle, something he calls the right law, and it is absolutely central to everything he teaches. He calls it jongbap, and he doesn't just present this as some nice spiritual idea. He says it's a practical universal law. I mean, the claim is huge. If you can just understand and apply this right law to your life, your problems, whether it's in business, your family, whatever, they'll just sort themselves out naturally. And look, he's not just talking in abstracts here. He gets very specific. Jongbap is supposed to be a roadmap for everything. How you should run your company, how you should manage your family, what the duty of an educated person is, even how you should treat every single person you meet. He's laying it out as a complete how-to guide for living the right way. So you have to be asking, right, who is this guy delivering this message? Well, according to his own story, his authority doesn't come from a fancy degree or a religious institution. Nope. It comes from a life of incredible hardship and raw experience, which he says was his real education. This quote right here tells you everything about how he sees himself. He's a total outsider, someone who didn't learn from books, but from the world itself, in the toughest ways imaginable. He's claiming that this brutal path is what allowed him to wake up to these fundamental truths of the universe. When you hear his story, that's his resume. He says that starting at just 4 years old in the slums of post-war Busan, he was basically thrown into the world to learn, delivering papers, selling ice cream and gum in some of the most difficult parts of society. He frames this whole journey not just as suffering, but as a deliberate curriculum, a course of study designed by the universe to get him ready for this mission. Okay, so all of this, the crisis, the solution, the messenger's story, it all builds to this massive turning point in his lecture. After laying all this groundwork, he completely flips the script and turns the focus right onto his audience with a pretty shocking revelation. He declares that those legendary saviors, the figures that so many traditions have been talking about for centuries, they're not some far-off hope anymore. He says they're here, right now. And here it is, the big reveal. He looks at his followers and tells them they are these prophesied leaders. He calls them Jongdoryong, which means something like masters of the right way. So he's not just trying to teach them something, he's telling them who they are meant to be. So now he lays out this choice, this fork in the road. He says that every potential leader is currently living as a Sado-young, a private leader, someone who uses their smarts and talents for themselves. But their true destiny, he says, is to become a Jongdo-young, a public leader, someone who lives for the good of everyone else. He claims the difference between the two is paper thin, but crossing that line changes absolutely everything. And finally, we get to what might be the most, audacious part of his whole vision. It's a massive prophecy that basically redraws the spiritual map of the world and puts the Korean peninsula right at the center of humanity's future. He makes this incredible claim that the biblical Garden of Eden isn't in the Middle East at all. It's Korea, and it always has been. He suggests the land was basically hidden from the world on purpose, like a sacred nursery where these future leaders, who he calls the heavenly descendants, could grow up until the time was right. And the prophecy doesn't stop there. He says 2 specific groups have a divine part to play in all this. The heavenly descendants, who he identifies as Koreans, were given the gift of wisdom to lead humanity.
And the Jewish people, he says, were given the divine gift for managing wealth and economics. And he prophesies that soon the Jewish people will recognize Korea as the true Eden and bring their economic power there.
And this quote right here, this is the end game. This is the ultimate goal of his entire vision. He claims that the union of these two forces, the spiritual wisdom from Korea and the economic engine managed by the Jewish people, that's the spark that will finally kick off a real era of world peace. So what Cheung-kong lays out is this massive, sweeping vision for the future of humanity. It's a path from personal crisis all the way to global peace. But you know, it all comes down to one thing: whether individuals can make that switch from living a private life to living a public one. And that really leaves us with the big question. A new age of peace is on the table, but will the very people he calls leaders actually answer the call to act?